Elderly couple buys storage for $5. Inside, they find evidence of a missing child no one remembered. The photograph showed a little girl's birthday party frozen in 1987, and written on the back in a child's handwriting were 4 words that made Dorothy's blood run cold. "Help me, I'm scared." Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, tell us where you're watching from. And to make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or life-changing discoveries, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Dorothy Whitmore's hands trembled as she turned the photograph over again, as if the words might have changed. Behind her, the storage unit stretched into shadow. 10 by 10 feet of forgotten life, purchased for $5 at a facility auction because nobody else had bid, because nobody remembered, because nobody cared. "Frank," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Frank, you need to see this." Her husband emerged from behind a stack of water-damaged boxes, dust coating his silver hair, his reading glasses perched on his nose. At 76, Frank Whitmore had seen plenty in his life. Korea, 40 years as a postal worker, 3 kids raised, 2 grandsons deployed. But when Dorothy handed him the photograph, she watched his face drain of color. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed. The little girl in the photo couldn't have been more than 7. Dark curly hair, gap-toothed smile, wearing a party hat tilted at an angle. Around her, other children laughed and played, streamers hanging in the background, a cake with 8 candles visible on a table. A normal birthday party, except for the message on the back. And except for what was in the box beneath where Dorothy had found the photo. More pictures, dozens of them. The same girl at different ages, maybe 5, maybe 8, maybe 10. School photos, candid shots. Pictures of her riding a bike, playing in a yard, sitting on a porch with a woman who might have been her mother. And in every single photograph taken after age 6 or 7, if you looked closely enough, there was something wrong. The smile didn't reach her eyes. The posture was stiff. In one photo, there was a bruise on her arm, poorly covered by a long sleeve that had ridden up. But it was the newspaper clipping that made Dorothy sit down hard on a moldy couch, dust rising around her. Newton Falls Daily, April 15, 1992. Local girl, 11, missing. Samantha Ruth Morrison, age 11, was reported missing by school officials on Monday after failing to attend classes for 2 weeks. Morrison, a 6th grader at Newton Falls Elementary, was last seen on April 1st. Her mother, Patricia Morrison, could not be reached for comment. Police are investigating. There was a small photo, a school picture of the same girl, older now, her smile forced, her eyes hollow. 1992, Frank said, reading over her shoulder. That's 33 years ago. Nobody's looking for her anymore, Dorothy whispered. Nobody remembers. Frank knelt beside the box, pulling out more contents with careful hands. A child's diary, its lock broken. Drawings, the kind children make, but these were dark, disturbing. A house with bars on the windows, stick figures with X's for eyes. Words written over and over, "Please, please." A shoebox containing a girl's sneaker, size 5, with what looked like dried blood on the heel. A VHS tape labeled in neat handwriting, "Sam's birthday, 1987." And at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in plastic, a driver's license. Not the girl's, she would have been too young. The name on the license read, Patricia Ann Morrison. Date of birth, 1952. The address, 847 Maple Street, Newton Falls, Ohio. The photo on the license showed a woman in her 30s, blonde hair, hard eyes, thin lips pressed into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Dorothy," Frank said slowly, "whose storage unit is this?" She pulled out the auction paperwork, hands shaking. The unit had been rented under the name P. Morrison, with payments automatically drafted until the account had finally been closed due to insufficient funds 6 months ago. The unit had been abandoned for 3 years before that, payments still coming, but nobody accessing it since 2022. Patricia Morrison, Dorothy read, the mother. They looked at each other in the dimness of the storage unit, surrounded by evidence of something terrible, something everyone had forgotten. "We need to call the police," Frank said. "And tell them what? That we found a missing child case from 1992? They'll say it's cold. They'll say there's no evidence of a crime. Look at this." Dorothy gestured at the boxes, the photos, the diary. "This is hidden. This is hidden evidence. The mother hid it here. Why would she do that unless she had something to do with the disappearance," Frank finished. The storage facility hummed around them, fluorescent lights flickering in the corridor beyond. It was 4 p.m. on a Thursday in March 2025, in a forgotten corner of Newton Falls, Ohio, a town of barely 8,000 people where Dorothy and Frank had retired 5 years ago to be closer to their daughter. They'd come to the auction looking for furniture, maybe some tools for Frank's workshop. $5 for a unit nobody wanted, nobody bid on, nobody remembered. And now they held evidence of a child who'd vanished into nothing. "The tape," Dorothy said suddenly. "We need to watch the tape. We need to call. After we watch it, we need to know what we're dealing with first." Frank wanted to argue, but he'd been married to Dorothy for 52 years. He knew that tone. They gathered the box, the photographs, the newspaper clipping, the tape. Frank paid the facility manager, a bored teenager who barely looked up from his phone, for a month's continued rental on Unit 247. They loaded everything into their Subaru and drove home in silence. Their house was a modest ranch on the edge of town, surrounded by other retirees' homes. Quiet streets, a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and nothing interesting ever happened. Dorothy made coffee while Frank set up the old VCR they kept in the basement, the one they used to watch their own family videos from the 80s and 90s. The tape was old, the image grainy when it finally appeared on screen. The timestamp in the corner read March 15, 1987. At first, it seemed innocent, a living room decorated for a party. The camera was shaky, handheld, amateur. Children's voices, laughter. Then the little girl appeared, wearing the same party hat from the photograph, her smile bright and real. "Happy birthday, Sammy," someone called from off-camera. A woman's voice, Patricia Morrison. Samantha blew out the candles, 8 of them. The other children cheered. The camera panned across the room, showing maybe 6 or 7 kids, all around the same age. Balloons, streamers, cake, normal. Then the camera focused back on Samantha, and she looked directly into the lens. "Thank you, Mommy," she said, her voice small and sweet. The image cut to static, then resumed. Different footage now, timestamp reading 3 hours later. The living room was empty of guests. Samantha sat alone on the couch, still in her party dress, but the hat was gone. The camera was stationary now, set up on a tripod perhaps. Patricia Morrison entered the frame. She sat down next to her daughter, and Samantha immediately tensed. "Did you have a good birthday?" Patricia asked. "Yes, Mommy." "Did you tell anyone?" The little girl's face went blank. "No, Mommy." "If you tell anyone, you know what happens." "I know, Mommy." "Say it." "If I tell, you'll—" Samantha's voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll make me go away like Daddy did." Patricia smiled, and it was the coldest thing Dorothy had ever seen. "That's right, baby. You'll disappear, just like Daddy, and nobody will ever find you." The tape went to static. Dorothy felt sick. Frank had gone pale, his jaw clenched. "There's more," he said, because the tape was still running. The image returned. Different day, the timestamp read April 2nd, 1992, 5 years later. Samantha was older now, 11, the same age she'd been in the missing person report. She sat in what looked like a basement, concrete walls visible behind her. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were red from crying. The camera was stationary again. Patricia's voice came from off-screen. "Tell them," she said. Samantha looked at the camera, and Dorothy saw absolute terror in that child's face. "My name is Samantha Morrison," she said in a flat, rehearsed tone. "I ran away from home because I was bad. I'm sorry I was bad. Don't look for me. I don't want to be found." Again, Patricia's voice commanded. "My name is Samantha Morrison. I ran away." The tape cut to black. Frank stopped the VCR with shaking hands. Dorothy sat frozen, coffee forgotten, staring at the blank screen. "She killed her," Dorothy finally said. "Patricia Morrison killed her own daughter, and she filmed a confession video to use if anyone ever looked too hard." "We're calling the police," Frank said, already reaching for his phone. "Right now." "Wait." Dorothy grabbed his arm. "Think about this. It's been 33 years. The mother, Patricia, where is she now? Is she even alive? And Samantha, if she died in 1992, where's the body? We have evidence, but evidence of what? That a woman was abusive? That a child went missing? The police in 1992 investigated and found nothing. Because they didn't have this." Frank gestured at the box, the tape, the photographs. "Because they didn't look hard enough. Or because Patricia hid it well. Or because—" Dorothy pulled out the newspaper clipping again, reading more carefully. "It says here the mother could not be reached for comment. What if Patricia disappeared too? What if she killed Samantha and ran?" Frank sat down heavily. "Then we need to find out what happened to Patricia Morrison. Because if she's alive, she needs to be in prison. And if she's dead, then maybe there's no one left who knows where Samantha is buried. Or," Dorothy said quietly, "maybe Samantha survived. Maybe she escaped. Maybe she's out there somewhere, 44 years old, living under a different name, trying to forget." They looked at each other, and Dorothy saw in her husband's eyes the same thing she felt. They couldn't walk away from this. A child, forgotten, lost, erased from memory, deserved better than to remain a ghost. "We investigate ourselves first," Dorothy said, quietly. "We find out what happened to Patricia Morrison. We find out if anyone else remembers Samantha. And then we take everything we find to the police." "Dorothy, we're not investigators. We're two old people with time and a reason to care," she interrupted. "Everyone else forgot about Samantha, but we won't. We can't." Frank studied his wife. 74 years old, retired librarian, grandmother of 5, with reading glasses and arthritis, and a stubborn streak that had gotten them through everything life had thrown their way. "Okay," he said, "we do this carefully. We do this smart. And the moment it gets dangerous, we bring in the authorities." Dorothy nodded. "The moment it gets dangerous." Neither of them acknowledged that it was already dangerous, that someone had hidden evidence of a crime for 33 years, that opening this box meant pulling at threads that someone, somewhere, had gone to great lengths to bury. But Samantha Morrison deserved the truth, and Dorothy and Frank Whitmore were going to find it. The Newton Falls Public Library occupied a brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between a hardware store and a diner. Dorothy had gotten her library card within a week of moving to town, but she'd never used it for research like this. The librarian on duty was a woman about their daughter's age, maybe 50, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Linda. "Can I help you find something?" she asked as Dorothy approached the reference desk. "I'm doing some genealogy research," Dorothy said, the lie coming easily. "Looking into local families from the late 80s and early 90s. Do you have newspaper archives from that period?" "We have microfiche through 1995 and digital archives after that." "What family name?" "Morrison, Patricia Morrison and her daughter Samantha." Something flickered across Linda's face, not quite recognition, more like a distant memory trying to surface. "Morrison. That name sounds familiar. Let me get you set up with the microfiche reader." While Linda pulled the relevant reels, Dorothy browsed the local history section. Newton Falls had been a mill town once. Population peaked at around 12,000 in the 1970s before the mill closed. Now it was the kind of place people left rather than moved to, kept alive by retirees and families who'd been here for generations. "Here you go," Linda said, returning with several boxes. 1987 through 1995. If you need anything else, just let me know." Dorothy settled in front of the microfiche reader, and soon Frank joined her, having spent the morning at the county clerk's office requesting property records for 847 Maple Street. "Anything?" she asked, quietly. "Property was sold in 1993, Frank reported. Patricia Morrison to a couple named Henderson. They lived there until 2010, then sold to the current owners. I got the Hendersons' forwarding address. They moved to Florida. We'll need to talk to them. They might have found something when they moved in, or heard stories from neighbors." Frank nodded, settling into the chair beside her. Together, they began to scroll through the old newspapers. The first mention of Samantha Morrison came in April 1992, exactly as the clipping they'd found reported. But as Dorothy read the full article, she noticed something odd. Police Chief Robert Davidson stated that Morrison's disappearance is being treated as a runaway case rather than an abduction. "We have no evidence of foul play," Davidson told reporters. The mother indicated that Samantha had been troubled lately, acting out. "It's not uncommon for children that age to run away." The mother indicated, Dorothy read aloud. Patricia was directing the narrative from the start. They found follow-up articles, smaller, buried on inside pages. April 20th, search continues for missing Newton Falls girl. May 3rd, no leads in Morrison case, police say. June 15th, Morrison investigation goes cold. And then, nothing. By July 1992, Samantha Morrison had vanished from the newspaper entirely, as if she'd never existed. "There," Frank said suddenly, pointing at the screen. "Go back." Dorothy scrolled back to a small article from August 1992. Morrison home stands empty. The residence at 847 Maple Street, formerly occupied by Patricia Morrison and her missing daughter Samantha, has been vacant for several weeks, neighbors report. Morrison, who could not be reached following her daughter's disappearance in April, appears to have left town. Police say they are not currently seeking Morrison for questioning, as there is no evidence linking her to her daughter's disappearance. The house is scheduled for foreclosure proceedings. "She ran," Dorothy said. "Right after Samantha disappeared, Patricia ran." Which could mean she was guilty, or what? What innocent reason would a mother have for abandoning her home right after her daughter goes missing? Frank didn't have an answer. They continued searching, looking for any mention of Patricia Morrison after 1992. On a hunch, Dorothy expanded the search to neighboring counties, looking for variations of the name. It took 3 hours, but she found it. Cleveland Plain Dealer, November 2003. Woman dies in apparent suicide. Patricia Ann Morrison, 51, was found dead in her Cleveland apartment on Monday. Police say Morrison died from an overdose of prescription medications in what appears to be a suicide. Morrison had no known family and few friends, according to neighbors. She will be cremated with no service planned. Dorothy printed the article, her hands steady despite the racing of her heart. Patricia Morrison had lived 11 more years after Samantha's disappearance, dying alone in Cleveland, an hour from Newton Falls, but a world away. She carried it with her, Dorothy said. Whatever she did, she carried it for 11 years, and then she couldn't anymore. Or she was sick, Frank suggested, or depressed. We can't know. Frank, you watched that tape. You saw what she said to that little girl. You'll disappear, just like Daddy. Frank went still. I'd forgotten about that. What happened to Samantha's father? They searched through marriage records, death certificates, old phone books. It took until late afternoon, but they found him. Richard Morrison, married to Patricia Ann Hartley in 1978. No divorce record, but a death certificate from 1986, cause of death listed as accidental drowning. 1 year before Samantha's 8th birthday, Dorothy noted. 1 year before that video of Patricia threatening her. Could be coincidence. Could be. Or Richard Morrison didn't drown accidentally, and Samantha knew something about it. They left the library as it closed at 5 p.m., Linda waving goodbye cheerfully, unaware that they'd just traced the outline of a tragedy no one remembered. At home, Dorothy made dinner while Frank pulled out the rest of the materials from the storage unit. The diary, they'd been avoiding it, but now it was time. The first entry was dated September 1989. Samantha would have been 9 years old. The handwriting was careful, childish, with frequent misspellings. Today was the first day of 4th grade. Miss Peters seems nice. She asked us to write about our summer. I didn't write about the basement. I wrote about going to the park. Mommy says if I ever tell anyone about the basement, she'll make me disappear like Daddy. I believe her. Dorothy felt her throat tighten. She continued reading, page after page of a child's attempt to document her life while hiding its darkest corners. October 12, 1989. Mommy locked me in the basement again. She says I was bad because I talked to the mailman. I wasn't bad, I just said hello. I was down there for 2 days. There's a bucket for the bathroom and some crackers. It's dark. I'm scared of the dark. December 25, 1989. Christmas. Mommy got me a bike. She was nice today. Sometimes she's nice, and I think maybe it will be different now. But then I do something wrong, and it's not different. March 3, 1990. I heard Mommy talking on the phone. She was talking about Daddy. She said he deserved it. I think she hurt Daddy. I think that's what happened at the lake. I was there, but I was too little to remember right. But sometimes I dream about it, and in the dream, Daddy is screaming, and Mommy is holding him under the water. Frank stopped reading, his face gray. Jesus Christ, Dorothy. This child watched her mother commit murder. And Patricia knew she knew. That's why the threats. That's why the isolation. Dorothy flipped ahead, scanning entries. Look, she barely mentions other children. No friends' names, no play dates, just school and home and the basement. The entries became less frequent as the years progressed, as if Samantha was giving up on documentation, or perhaps being watched too closely to write. The last entry was dated March 30, 1992. I'm going to run away. I'm going to wait until Mommy is asleep, and I'm going to run away. I'm going to go to Miss Carter at school, and I'm going to tell her everything. About Daddy, about the basement, about everything. I'm scared, but I can't stay here anymore. If this doesn't work, if Mommy catches me, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry to whoever finds this. My name is Samantha Ruth Morrison, and I'm 11 years old, and I just want to be safe. The next pages were blank. April 1st, Dorothy said. The newspaper said she was last seen April 1st, 2 days after this entry. She tried to run, Frank said, and Patricia caught her. They sat in silence, the diary between them, the weight of a child's terror pressing down. We need to find out if there's a body, Dorothy finally said. If Patricia killed her, she had to put her somewhere. The storage unit, Frank said suddenly. Why did Patricia keep all this evidence? The photos, the tape, the diary. If she killed Samantha, why not destroy it? It was a good question. Dorothy thought about it, turning it over in her mind. Insurance, she said slowly. Patricia was documenting. Maybe in case anyone came looking, she'd have proof that Samantha was troubled, that she ran away. The birthday video shows a normal, happy childhood. The later video shows Samantha confessing to running away. The photos could be explained as a mother's keepsakes. Even the diary, a mother holding on to her missing daughter's possessions. But the tape with Patricia threatening her was at the end. Maybe Patricia was going to edit it out. Or maybe she kept it because she was proud of her control. Abusers do that sometimes. They document their power. Frank stood, pacing the small kitchen. Okay, so we have motive. Samantha knew about Richard Morrison's murder. We have opportunity. Patricia was the last person to see Samantha alive. We have evidence of abuse and threats. What we don't have is a body or any proof of actual murder. The basement, Dorothy said. In the diary, Samantha mentions being locked in the basement repeatedly. And in that last video, she's in a basement. If Patricia killed her, she might have done it there. The house was sold in 1993. If there was anything to find, the new owners would have found it. Maybe. Or maybe they didn't look carefully enough. Or maybe Dorothy pulled out the property records Frank had obtained. Maybe there was a reason Patricia sold the house so quickly after disappearing. She needed to close that chapter completely. Frank checked his watch. It's almost 8. Too late to call the Hendersons in Florida tonight. But tomorrow we call them, Dorothy agreed. And we start asking around the neighborhood. Someone must remember the Morrisons. Someone must have wondered what happened to that little girl. That night, Dorothy couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Samantha's face in the photographs, the slow death of joy in her eyes, the way her smile became more forced with each passing year. She kept hearing the small voice on the tape. If I tell, you'll make me go away like Daddy did. At 2 a.m., she got up and went to the dining room, where they'd spread out all the evidence. She picked up the photographs one by one, studying them more carefully. In most of them, Samantha was alone or with Patricia. But in a few, the earlier ones, from when she was 5 or 6, there were other people. An elderly woman in one photo, standing next to Samantha at what looked like a school event. A younger woman in another, maybe a teacher, with her arm around Samantha's shoulders. And in one photo, barely visible in the background, was a sign. Newton Falls Elementary, Spring Fair, 1986. Dorothy grabbed her laptop and started searching. Newton Falls Elementary had closed in 2005, merged with the middle school. But there might be records. There might be teachers who remembered. She made a list of things to do. 1. Call the Hendersons in Florida. 2. Find former teachers from Newton Falls Elementary. 3. Check with the county coroner for any unidentified remains from 1992 to 1993. 4. Search the property records for any work permits on 847 Maple Street before it's sold. 5. Contact the police department, carefully, to see what records remained from the original investigation. Frank found her at 3 a.m., surrounded by notes and printouts, her eyes red from staring at the screen. "You should sleep," he said gently. "I keep thinking about what she wrote. I just want to be safe." She was 11 years old, and all she wanted was to be safe. And nobody kept her safe. Nobody saved her. Frank sat down beside her, taking her hand. "We can't save her. If she died in 1992, we're 33 years too late." "I know. But we can give her justice. We can make sure people remember her. we can make sure Patricia Morrison doesn't get to be forgotten as just another suicide in Cleveland. She was a murderer, and Samantha was a victim. They both deserve to be remembered for what they really were. Okay, Frank said. Then let's do this right. Tomorrow we make a timeline. We document everything. We figure out exactly what happened and when. And then we take it to the police with enough evidence that they can't ignore it. Dorothy nodded, but she was already thinking ahead. Because something was bothering her, tickling at the edge of her consciousness. The storage unit. Patricia had rented it in 1995, 3 years after Samantha's disappearance. Why? If she'd killed her daughter in 1992, why wait 3 years to hide the evidence? Unless, Frank, she said slowly, what if Patricia didn't put the evidence in storage right away? What if she kept it with her, in her apartment in Cleveland, and only moved it to storage later? Why would she do that? Because someone was looking, or because she was afraid someone would look. The unit was rented under her name, but the address on the rental agreement was in Cleveland. She could have been storing it somewhere accessible at first, then got spooked and moved it to Newton Falls, back to the town shed fled, because who would look there? That's a lot of speculation. Everything about this case is speculation. But think about it. If we're right, if Patricia killed Samantha, then she lived with that guilt and fear for 11 years. Maybe she kept the evidence close because she couldn't let go. And then, closer to her death, she moved it to storage. She couldn't bring herself to destroy it, but she didn't want it found with her when she died. Frank considered this. So the question is, what happened in 1995 that made Patricia move the evidence? We need to check Cleveland news from that period, see if there was any renewed interest in the case, any reason Patricia would have felt threatened. They added it to the list. At 9 a.m. the next morning, Dorothy called the Hendersons in Florida. A man answered, voice made thin by age and distance. Mr. Henderson, my name is Dorothy Whitmore. I'm calling about a house you used to own in Newton Falls, Ohio, 847 Maple Street. There was a pause. Haven't thought about that place in years. What's this regarding? I'm doing some research into the family that lived there before you, the Morrisons, Patricia and Samantha Morrison. Another pause, longer this time. The missing girl. Yeah, I remember. That was part of why we got the house so cheap. Sat empty for almost a year. People said it was cursed or haunted or some nonsense. We didn't believe in that stuff. Needed the space, price was right. Did you ever find anything unusual in the house, especially in the basement? Unusual how? Dorothy chose her words carefully. Anything that seemed out of place, anything that might have belonged to the family that lived there before. Well, Henderson said slowly, there was something. My wife, Janet, she wanted to renovate the basement, finish it, make it into a playroom for the kids. When the contractors opened up one of the walls, they found something weird. Dorothy's pulse quickened. What did they find? A space behind the drywall, like a hiding spot. Small, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet, accessible through a panel that had been sealed up. Inside was a blanket and some empty food containers, and scratches on the wall, like someone had been locked in there and tried to claw their way out. Dorothy closed her eyes, seeing it too clearly. Samantha, locked in that space, terrified, alone. What did you do? She asked. Called the police, naturally. They came out, looked at it, took some photos, but they said without any evidence of recent activity, there wasn't anything to investigate. The house had been empty for a year. Could have been anything. Kids playing, previous owner doing something weird. They wrote it off. Did they ever connect it to Samantha Morrison's disappearance? If they did, they didn't tell us. We were new to town, didn't know the history. It was only later that the neighbors told us about the missing girl. By then, the police had already closed the case, or whatever you call it, when they decide there's nothing to investigate. Mr. Henderson, do you remember which police officer responded to your call? Sure, it was the chief himself, Davidson, Robert Davidson. He seemed, I don't know, dismissive, like he didn't want to be there. Took a few pictures, wrote something in a notepad, and that was it. Never heard from him again. Dorothy thanked him and hung up, her mind racing. Frank had been listening on speaker, and his expression mirrored her thoughts. Davidson was the same chief who investigated Samantha's disappearance, Frank said, and he was the one who declared it a runaway case. And 3 years later, when evidence of potential abuse was found in the Morrison house, he dismissed it again. You're thinking cover-up. I'm thinking incompetence at best, complicity at worst. They spent the rest of the morning researching Robert Davidson. He'd retired in 2005 after 30 years as Newton Falls police chief. He died in 2019 at age 78. But in the obituary, they found something interesting. Davidson is survived by his sister, Ellen Davidson Morrison, and 2 nieces. Davidson Morrison? Could be a coincidence, Frank said. How many Morrisons could there be in a town of 8,000 people? They pulled up marriage records. Ellen Davidson had married James Morrison in 1968. James Morrison, who had an older brother named Richard, Samantha's father. Robert Davidson was Richard Morrison's brother-in-law, Dorothy said, the pieces clicking together. He was Patricia's uncle by marriage, which means he had a reason to protect her. Or to look the other way. If Patricia killed Richard and Davidson suspected it, he might have helped her cover it up to protect the family name. And when Samantha disappeared, he made sure the investigation went nowhere. We need to find Ellen, Frank said. She might know something. Ellen Davidson Morrison was still alive, living in a nursing home on the outskirts of Newton Falls. Dorothy called and made an appointment to visit that afternoon, claiming to be researching local history for a community project. The Shady Oaks Retirement Community was exactly what its name suggested. A cluster of low buildings surrounded by oak trees, their leaves just beginning to turn with the early spring. Ellen Davidson Morrison was in room 14, a small space made smaller by accumulated possessions. Photos on every surface, Afghans draped over chairs, the smell of lavender and age. Ellen herself was 91, sharp-eyed despite the walker beside her chair, her hands twisted with arthritis. "You said this was about local history?" she asked, as Dorothy and Frank settled into visitors' chairs. "In a way," Dorothy said carefully. "We're looking into families from the 1980s and 90s. Particularly the Morrison family, your nephew Richard and his wife Patricia." Ellen's expression shuddered immediately. That family is dead and buried. Why bring it up now? Because their daughter, Samantha, deserves to be remembered. Samantha ran away. That's what the police said. That's what everyone said. Is that what you believed? Ellen was quiet for a long moment, her gnarled fingers picking at the Afghan on her lap. "What do you want from me?" "The truth," Dorothy said simply. "The truth?" Ellen laughed, bitter and tired. "The truth is that my nephew married a monster and my brother covered it up because he didn't want the scandal. Is that what you wanted to hear?" Frank leaned forward. "You knew Patricia killed Richard?" "I suspected. Richard was a good swimmer, grew up on Lake Erie, could swim before he could walk. Patricia said he drowned, had some story about a cramp, about her trying to save him. But Richard had bruises. I saw them at the funeral. Bruises on his neck, his shoulders, like someone had held him under. Why didn't you say anything?" "I did. I went to Bobby, my brother, Chief Davidson. I told him something wasn't right, and he told me to let it go. Said it would only hurt Samantha if we dragged the family through an investigation. Said Patricia was grieving and scared and not thinking clearly. He made me promise to keep quiet." "And you did?" Dorothy said, trying to keep accusation out of her voice. "I did," Ellen confirmed, "to my shame. But I watched them after that, Patricia and Samantha, and I saw what was happening to that little girl. She got quieter every year, scared, like she was always waiting for something bad to happen." "Did you try to help her? How?" I went to Bobby again in 1990, told him I thought Patricia was abusing Samantha. He said he'd look into it, but nothing happened. And then in 1992, Samantha disappeared, and Bobby said she'd run away because Patricia was too strict. He said it was better this way, that Samantha would have a chance at a new life somewhere. You believed that? Ellen's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to believe it. God help me, I wanted to believe that little girl got away and found somewhere safe. But in my heart, I knew. Patricia killed Richard, and then she killed Samantha because Samantha knew. And Bobby helped her cover it up because he couldn't face what he'd let happen. Dorothy felt a surge of anger at Davidson, at Ellen, at everyone who'd looked away while a child suffered. But Ellen was an old woman now, dying slowly in a nursing home, and she'd clearly carried the guilt for decades. Where did Bobby think Samantha was? Frank asked. When Patricia disappeared right after, where did he think she'd gone? He said Patricia told him Samantha had run away to California to find some relatives. Said Patricia was going to follow, try to bring her back. But I think Bobby knew the truth. I think he knew, and he did nothing, because by then, there was no way to fix it without admitting he'd covered up a murder and let a child die. Did Bobby ever say anything to you about it? Later, before he died? Ellen nodded slowly. Once. It was 2018, the year before he died. He had cancer, knew he was going. I went to see him in the hospital. He was on morphine, in and out. But he grabbed my hand and he said, "Ellen, I'm sorry. I should have looked. I should have made them look." And I knew what he meant. He should have made them search for Samantha's body. Do you have any idea where Patricia might have put her? I used to drive by that house on Maple Street. After it sold, after the new family moved in, I'd look at it and wonder if that little girl was still there, somewhere, in the walls or under the floor or in the backyard. But I never had the courage to find out. Dorothy and Frank exchanged glances. The hiding space the Hendersons had found, could it have been more than just a prison? Could it have been a tomb? One more question, Dorothy said. In 1995, did anything happen? Anything that might have made Patricia nervous? Ellen frowned, thinking, 1995, that was the year they tore down Newton Falls Elementary to build the new school. There was a lot of construction, a lot of digging, and I remember thinking at the time that Patricia was probably worried they'd find something. I saw her once that year at a grocery store in Cleveland. I was visiting a friend, and there she was. She looked terrible, thin, haunted. She saw me and practically ran. That was the last time I ever saw her. After they left the nursing home, Dorothy and Frank sat in the car, processing everything they'd learned. The basement hiding space, Frank said. If that was where Patricia kept Samantha when she was alive, it could be where she left her after she died. But the Hendersons said the police checked it, and they didn't find remains. They found a space behind drywall. How thoroughly did they check? Did they look under the floor? Did they use cadaver dogs? Dorothy pulled out her phone and called the Newton Falls Police Department. She asked for records related to 847 Maple Street from 1993, specifically the investigation of the hidden space. After 20 minutes on hold and several transfers, she was told that files from that period had been digitized, but many were incomplete due to water damage in the old records room. "Can you tell me if cadaver dogs were used in that investigation?" she asked. More hold time. Then, no notation of cadaver dogs, just says visual inspection performed, no evidence of foul play. Visual inspection by a police chief who was actively covering up a potential murder. Dorothy hung up and looked at Frank. "We need to get into that house." "Dorothy, that's breaking and entering." "We need to convince the current owners to let us search the basement." "And tell them what? That we think there might be a dead child under their house?" "If necessary, yes." Frank sighed, but he was already starting the car. "You're going to get us arrested." only if we're wrong. The current owners of 847 Maple Street were a young couple named the Rodriguezes, Miguel and Ashley, both in their 30s with 2 small children. They answered the door with polite confusion when Dorothy and Frank showed up unannounced. Dorothy had decided that honesty was the only approach that might work. Over the course of 20 minutes, standing on their front porch, she explained everything. The storage unit, the photographs, the diary, the video, Samantha Morrison's disappearance, the hiding space the Hendersons had found, Chief Davidson's cover-up. Ashley went pale. Miguel looked skeptical but troubled. "You're telling us there might be a dead body in our basement?" Miguel said. "I'm telling you that I think someone needs to search your basement properly," Dorothy clarified. "With equipment, with experts, not just a visual inspection." "Have you gone to the police with this?" "Not yet, because the last time someone went to the police about this house, the police chief buried it. I wanted to be sure first. I wanted to have enough evidence that they couldn't ignore it." The Rodriguezes looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. "Our kids play in the basement," Ashley said quietly. If there's something down there, let us bring in a cadaver dog," Dorothy said, "just to check. If the dog doesn't alert, then you know there's nothing, and you can go back to your life. But if it does alert, then we have to live knowing," Miguel finished. "Then you have to live knowing you helped give a missing child justice," Frank corrected gently. After more discussion, the Rodriguezes agreed to let them arrange a cadaver dog sweep, but only if it was done officially, through proper channels, which meant it was finally time to go to the police. Dorothy called the Newton Falls Police Department and asked to speak to whoever had replaced Chief Davidson. She was transferred to Chief Lisa Martinez, who'd taken over in 2010. "This is an unusual call," Chief Martinez said after Dorothy explained, succinctly, carefully, what they'd found. "I understand it's complicated," Dorothy replied, "but we have physical evidence of abuse and potential murder. We have testimony from family members. We have a house with a documented hidden space that was never properly investigated. All we're asking is that you take this seriously." "Ma'am, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're describing is a cold case from 1992. Even if everything you say is true, the statute of limitations— There's no statute of limitations on murder." "No, but the suspect is dead. Patricia Morrison died in 2003. Even if we found remains and could prove she killed her daughter, we can't prosecute a dead woman." "But you could give that little girl her name back," Dorothy said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "You could acknowledge that she existed, that she mattered, that she deserved better than to be forgotten. And you could make sure the record shows what really happened, instead of the lie that Chief Davidson put in the official reports." There was a long silence. Then, "Send me everything you have. Photos, videos, documents, witness statements. I'll review it with my team. If we determine there's sufficient cause, we'll arrange for a proper search of the property. The current owners have agreed to cooperate. That helps. Give me 48 hours to review everything and get back to you." Dorothy spent those 48 hours making copies of everything, organizing it into a coherent timeline, writing up a detailed summary. Frank helped, the two of them working late into the night like they had when they were younger, when they'd stayed up helping their kids with school projects or preparing for tax season. On the morning of the third day, Chief Martinez called back. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed your materials. I've also pulled the original case files from 1992 and the report from 1993 regarding the hidden space. I want to be clear, this is going to be controversial. Chief Davidson is still remembered fondly in this town, and what you're alleging—" "What we're alleging is true," Dorothy said firmly. "I believe you, and that's why I've arranged for a forensic team to sweep the property at 847 Maple Street tomorrow morning. We'll use ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. If there's anything to find, we'll find it." Dorothy felt her knees go weak with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. If we don't find anything, this ends here. I can't justify a prolonged investigation based solely on old evidence and speculation, no matter how compelling. But if we do find something, Chief Martinez paused. Then we're going to have to reopen a lot of old wounds in this town. Samantha Morrison's wounds never healed, Dorothy said quietly, because nobody cared enough to treat them. The next morning dawned gray and cold, typical March weather in Ohio. Dorothy and Frank drove to Maple Street just after 7 a.m. to find a small crowd had already gathered: neighbors, curious onlookers, a reporter from the local paper. Chief Martinez met them on the sidewalk. She was younger than Dorothy expected, maybe 50, with close-cropped dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "The Rodriguezes are inside with their children," Martinez said. "We've asked them to stay upstairs while we work. The forensic team is setting up now." Dorothy watched as technicians carried equipment into the house: ground-penetrating radar units, lights, cameras. 2 handlers arrived with Belgian Malinois, lean and focused, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. "This could take hours," Martinez said. "You don't need to stay." "Yes," Dorothy said, "we do." Frank squeezed her hand in agreement. They waited on the sidewalk, along with a growing crowd of neighbors. Word had spread quickly in the small town. Dorothy heard whispers. "Isn't that the Morrison house? The girl who disappeared back in the 90s? I heard they found evidence. Bobby Davidson covered it up." Around 10 a.m., there was a change in the energy around the house. The technicians moved more quickly. The dogs were brought back inside. Chief Martinez's expression went grim. 15 minutes later, she emerged and walked over to Dorothy and Frank. "We found something," Martinez said quietly. "Under the basement floor, beneath where the hidden space was located. Ground-penetrating radar showed an anomaly. We're bringing in excavation equipment, but—" She paused. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think you were right. I think Samantha Morrison never left this house." Dorothy felt tears spring to her eyes. Beside her, Frank wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "How long until you know for sure?" Frank asked. "Could be days. We need to excavate carefully, preserve any evidence. But based on the radar images and the dog alerts, I'd say we're looking at human remains, approximately child-sized, buried approximately 30 years ago." The excavation took 3 days. Dorothy and Frank came back each morning, watching from a respectful distance as the forensic team carefully, methodically removed soil and concrete from the basement of 847 Maple Street. The Rodriguezes had moved to a hotel. They'd told their children it was an adventure, but Dorothy had seen the haunted look in Ashley's eyes. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Chief Martinez called Dorothy to come to the police station. In a small conference room, Martinez laid out photographs carefully. "We found skeletal remains," she said, "approximately 4 feet tall, consistent with a child aged 10–12. The remains were wrapped in plastic and buried under concrete. We found fabric remnants consistent with a nightgown, and—" She pulled out a photo. This. It was a small silver bracelet, tarnished with age, with a name engraved on it: Samantha. Dental records will take a few weeks to confirm, but given the location, the age of the remains, and the physical evidence, I'm confident we've found Samantha Morrison. Dorothy looked at the photograph of the bracelet, and something inside her broke. She cried, for the little girl who'd written, "I just want to be safe," in her diary, for the child who'd tried to run and been caught, for the 33 years she'd lain forgotten in the darkness. Frank cried too, silently, his hand gripping Dorothy's. When she could speak again, Dorothy asked, "What happens now?" "Now we close the case, officially. The medical examiner will determine cause of death. Preliminary examination suggests blunt force trauma to the skull. We document everything, we write the report, and we make sure the record reflects the truth. Samantha Morrison was murdered by her mother, Patricia Morrison, in April 1992. Chief Robert Davidson failed to properly investigate and may have actively covered up the crime. His reputation will take a hit, but the truth matters more than protecting a dead man's reputation. Martinez's expression was hard. Davidson failed this child. That needs to be in the record. And Samantha? She deserves more than just a file being closed. She'll be buried properly. We'll reach out to any surviving family. I know Ellen Davidson Morrison is still alive. And we'll make sure her story is told. The local paper has already been in touch. This is going to be news, Mrs. Whitmore, not just locally. A 30-year-old murder solved by a couple who bought a storage unit for $5? That's the kind of story that goes national. Dorothy hadn't thought about that. She didn't want attention. She just wanted justice for Samantha. But Frank was nodding slowly. Good, he said. People should know. Other storage units sit abandoned. Other children go missing and are forgotten. If Samantha's story makes people pay attention, makes them remember, then maybe some good comes from all this horror. The funeral was held 3 weeks later, after the medical examiner released Samantha's remains. Ellen Davidson Morrison, frail but determined, arranged everything. Dorothy and Frank attended, along with Chief Martinez, the Rodriguezes, and nearly 100 townspeople who'd never met Samantha but came anyway to bear witness. Ellen had chosen a plot in Newton Falls Cemetery, not far from where Richard Morrison was buried. The headstone was simple: Samantha Ruth Morrison, 1980 to 1992, beloved daughter, finally at peace. During the service, Ellen spoke briefly, her voice shaking. My nephew's daughter deserved better than what life gave her. She deserved protection and love and safety. We all failed her. But these people, she gestured to Dorothy and Frank, these strangers, they didn't fail her. They remembered when everyone else forgot. They fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Samantha, I'm sorry we didn't save you, but at least now you can rest. After the service, people lined up to talk to Dorothy and Frank, thanking them, crying, sharing their own stories of loss and injustice. A woman who'd been in Samantha's class at school. I remember her being so quiet. I always wondered what happened to her. A man who'd lived next door to the Morrisons. We heard things, crying, but we didn't want to interfere. I've regretted that every day since. She was such a bright little girl. And then something in her just dimmed. I should have asked more questions. Dorothy listened to all of them, heard the guilt and regret, and tried to be gracious. But part of her was angry. Angry that so many people had suspected, had seen signs, and done nothing. A whole town of bystanders, and one little girl had paid the price. As the crowd dispersed and the cemetery emptied, Dorothy and Frank stood alone by the grave. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. "Do you think she knows?" Dorothy asked quietly. "Somehow, wherever she is, do you think she knows we found her?" "I think she knows she's not forgotten anymore," Frank replied. "That has to count for something." They placed flowers on the grave, yellow roses, because Dorothy had read in the diary that yellow was Samantha's favorite color. Then they walked back to their car, leaving Samantha Morrison to her rest at last. The story did go national, just as Chief Martinez predicted. News outlets from across the country picked it up. Couple finds evidence of cold case murder in $5 storage unit. Dorothy and Frank did a few interviews, though they tried to redirect attention from themselves to Samantha, to the systemic failures that had let her fall through the cracks. The Newton Falls Police Department conducted an internal review of Chief Davidson's tenure. They found multiple cases where Davidson had cut investigations short, destroyed evidence, or written reports that contradicted witness statements. His name was removed from the Wall of Honor at the police station. His widow declined to comment publicly, but through a lawyer expressed that she'd been unaware of his professional misconduct. Ellen Davidson Morrison passed away 6 months after Samantha's funeral, peacefully in her sleep. In her will, she left a substantial donation to a newly created foundation in Samantha's name, dedicated to helping child abuse victims and funding cold case investigations. The Rodriguezes sold the house on Maple Street. They couldn't live there anymore, knowing what it had witnessed. The house sat empty for a year before being bought by a developer who tore it down and built a small park. The park was named Samantha Morrison Memorial Park, with a playground and a garden and a plaque telling her story. As for Dorothy and Frank, they returned to their quiet retirement, but with a new purpose. They started volunteering with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, using their experience to help other families searching for lost loved ones. They became advocates for regular audits of abandoned storage units, pushing for legislation requiring facilities to report suspicious contents to authorities. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, they'd pull out the box from Unit 247, now logged as evidence but returned to them after the trial, and look through Samantha's photographs and diary entries. Not with sadness anymore, but with a sense of completion. They'd finished what they'd started. They'd given voice to the voiceless. 1 year to the day after they'd opened that storage unit, Dorothy and Frank drove back to Riverside Storage, where it had all begun. The facility was under new management, but the teenager working the desk recognized them from the news. "You're the couple who found that missing girl," he said, eyes wide. "That was insane. Do you really buy storage units looking for stuff like that?" "No," Dorothy said firmly. "We bought one storage unit for $5 because we needed furniture. We found evidence of a terrible crime, and we did what anyone should do. We followed through." "Still," the teenager said, "pretty crazy that you were the ones who found it, like fate or something." Frank and Dorothy exchanged glances. They'd had this conversation many times over the past year, in the quiet hours when they couldn't sleep, when the weight of what they'd discovered pressed down. "Maybe," Dorothy said, "or maybe it's just that we were willing to look. A lot of people saw signs that something was wrong with Samantha Morrison. A lot of people suspected something wasn't right in that house, but everyone looked away. We were just the first people who looked and didn't turn away." They walked back to their car, and as they drove home through the afternoon traffic, Dorothy thought about all the other storage units out there, all the other forgotten corners where evidence of tragedy might be hiding. She thought about all the missing children, the unsolved cases, the stories that ended without resolution. They couldn't solve them all. They were just two old people, retired, living on fixed incomes with their own health problems and family concerns. But they'd solved one. They'd remembered one forgotten child. They'd given one victim justice. And maybe, Dorothy thought, that was enough. Not enough to balance the scales of all the world's cruelty, but enough to matter. Enough to prove that even the forgotten can be found. Even the lost can be brought home. Even the silenced can speak again, if someone is willing to listen. Samantha Ruth Morrison had been silent for 33 years, but in the end, she'd told her story. Through the photographs, the diary, the video, the evidence hidden in a $5 storage unit. And Dorothy and Frank had made sure the world heard it. That night, as Dorothy prepared for bed, she paused by the small frame on her nightstand. It was one of the photographs from the storage unit, Samantha at age 6. Before the worst of the abuse had started, smiling with genuine joy at the camera. Ellen had given it to Dorothy after the funeral, saying Samantha should be remembered as she'd been in her happiest moments. "Sleep well, sweetheart," Dorothy whispered to the photograph, as she did every night now. "You're safe now. You're home." And for the first time in 33 years, that was true. Samantha Morrison was safe. Samantha Morrison was home. And Samantha Morrison would never be forgotten again.